Good evening, Patriots, and welcome to the 78th audio file in the audiocast series known as the Q News Patriot. I am the Q News Patriot. My name is SG Anon. Coming to you a little bit late on this end with this file. It's a few minutes after midnight as I record this for the final rendition and release. And I thank all of you for your patience, your grace, and your understanding in me actually getting it out and published. The events of July have caused me to back up a number of times and reevaluate weeks worth of research, and some areas months worth of research, in an attempt to distill the best interpretation of events as I'm seeing them from where I sit. I think by the end of our file, each of you will be heartily encouraged, as I am, despite the instabilities that we've seen in recent weeks and despite the close calls that all of us know have been sort of out there in the muckety muck. While there's turbulence between now and the finish line, there is a glorious, I believe, finish line awaiting us on the other side. And I believe President Trump himself has been telling us that very loudly in nonverbal ways. That and more. So let's go ahead and get right to it. I thought it would be appropriate to start our file today discussing the death of the serpent dollar and the remarkable transition in world power and geopolitical shifting that is currently at play. A number of different articles now hitting the mainstream discussion point in financial sectors in significant pulpits, Yahoo Finance, the Heritage Foundation, and others. These arenas hold significant sway on the overall opinion of the market worldwide, of worldwide finance, and those that sort of pull those levers. And so coming over here out of the UK, an article from just yesterday, how real are the threats to the US dollar, the eroding dominance of the world's #1 currency? Treasury Secretary Yellen has warned that countries around the world are moving away from the dollar due to fears over America's huge debt. Meanwhile, the BRICS nations are making a concerted effort to knock the dollar off its throne, and cryptocurrencies are chipping away at the dominance as well. The dollar amounts in US dollars, unless otherwise stated. Let me see here. Why a major global push to de-dollarize could spell catastrophe for America's economy. Okay, so let's go on a little bit further down here. I want to make sure to stay relevant for our discussion. The dollar's share of central bank foreign reserves stands at 58%, according to the Atlantic Council. That figure has hovered consistently around 60% since the 1990s, while the euro has a share of 20%. In terms of trade, the dollar is leader of the pack by a wide margin. The dollar is also dominant when it comes to foreign exchange transactions, with all monetary in lingua franca part of a whopping 88% of foreign exchange transactions globally. So given this, we understand that the dollar itself and the overall shifting from a fiat-controlled, concentrated occultist system in the West to a balanced and fair system, I guess is the best way to say it, an equal system in the best terminology. That's a very difficult process because of the size of the behemoth, the size of the elephant that's having to sort of be consumed within the room, so to speak. And yet we are seeing concerted efforts towards that, and those efforts are now yielding real, lasting and permanent results. An article just a couple of days ago is the dollar's dominance coming to an end. Tavi Costa, partner and macro strategist from Crescat Capital, highlighted in a recent interview that net interest payments as a percentage of GDP will reach their highest level in 2 centuries. The potential benefits of cutting interest rates to alleviate the surging debt service payments are now beginning to outweigh the fight against inflation. So this is coming from, an individual who's an industry insider, who's actively involved in the management of, or excuse me, in the strategic direction of a large wealth management firm. And they're essentially saying from that pulpit, those financial sectors, that this is now an unavoidable problem. And with the movement of the BRICS nations, the shifting of the petrodollar, the actions that Ankara in Turkey has just taken within the recent weeks here, and honestly in recent days with regards to announcements coming directly out of Erdogan's mouth, we're seeing a complete disconnection of every major node that is continuing to underpin the job of the Hut that is the overall Federal Reserve dollar system worldwide. And I found this article from the Heritage Foundation particularly fascinating given the discussion surrounding Japan. We've talked about Japan and the Pacific theater itself as a whole, essentially being the linchpin to unearth and to bring down the North American market system and to cause a significant disruption and problem within that system, perhaps a collapse, right? And so this article from just a few days ago, will a Japanese fire sale crash U.S. debt? Profligate government spending has institutionalized multi-trillion-dollar annual deficits, which have driven up interest rates and left treasury markets teetering on the edge. Now Japan is on the verge of a $400 billion fire sale of U.S. debt. This could break the back of the treasury market and devastate finances for North Americans. The source of Japan's sudden need for liquidity is the state-owned government pension fund, which holds the Social Security reserves of every Japanese worker. Because the government is trying to prop up the plunging yen, it will sell American assets and buy Japanese ones. These amounts are not trivial. The fund is more than 1.5 trillion US dollars, of which 400 billion is in US treasuries. This conversion from dollar assets to yen assets means dumping a quantity of treasuries on the market equal to 20% of the federal government's net annual borrowing. A 20% increase in the supply of Federal Reserve treasuries is huge when yields are already around 5% and poised to go higher. Higher yields increase how much interest must be paid to service the $35 trillion debt. Last month, the Treasury Department spent $140 billion just on interest to keep the debt scheme going forward. For perspective, that amounts to 3/4 of the personal income tax revenue collected for the entire month of June in the United States. If Japan begins unloading U.S. treasuries, it will exacerbate this problem. Increasing the supply of treasuries will make it harder for the U.S. government to sell new ones and finance the massive deficit. The only way to entice people to buy them will be to offer higher interest rates, which will cause the interest on the debt to climb higher and faster, leading to $2 trillion and beyond. Many countries around the world have already sold off all of their treasuries. China, the second largest holder of foreign U.S. debt, is selling them hand over fist, having sold 1/3 of their entire holdings in the past 5 years. If the largest holder, Japan, has a fire sale in this environment, it would be the equivalent of a margin call on the U.S. Treasury Department. That's the moment the bank tells you to cough up more cash or they cut you off. People the world over are losing confidence in the federal government's ability to repay the debts. In just 3.5 years, the dollar has lost 20% of its value, wiping out trillions worth of bondholders' wealth around the world. This kind of backdoor default is why some Japanese banks have already begun liquidating treasury holdings, including the country's fifth largest bank, Norinchukin, selling $63 billion in treasuries. The even larger Japan Post Bank has more than $550 billion in U.S. bonds, which also might head soon to the auction block. The fire sale won't end there, because Japan's government pension fund influences all of the other pensions in Japan. Another $800 billion in U.S. assets might be looking for a new financial home. Even as almost every treasury buyer is selling, including the Federal Reserve, the federal government is ramping up borrowing to cover its ballooning deficits. Financial markets are staring down the barrel of soaring interest rates and a massive liquidity drain. If the Treasury gets backed into this corner and is forced to pony up a higher yield, then things will unravel fast. We'll look back fondly at 8% mortgage rates and the limited bank failures of 2023 because things will be much worse much more quickly. Of course, the government could short-circuit this entire collapse by simply cutting its spending. After all, margin calls won't happen if investors believe that the investment is still good. There is no sign, however, of such responsibility in the Washington government. The reason I went through the entirety of that article, besides the fact that it's pretty short read and it's easy to digest and understand, is also the fact that it brings up a significant amount of indicators that show us exactly where we're at in this process. A Chinese military conflict in the Pacific would ignite all of those actions that were just described in that particular article, as Japan and what remains of the Japan NATO-aligned military forces, I think they're termed the Territorial Defense Forces in Japan, but essentially what remains of Japan's military would seek to preserve its own control. And one of the ways that it would do so would be to, in league with the Japanese government, finance its own activities. And one would have to disconnect from the failing Federal Reserve dollar, the failing U.S. serpent dollar, in order to manage a crisis that was spawned by an economic power, really a growing superpower in the world, which is China, and the ability of the People's Liberation Army and the various military forces of China to leverage and enforce the will of that particular group. So a Chinese conflict, which we know is coming, a conflict to the Korean Peninsula, which we know is coming, and which North Korea, I think, is going to play a very significant part and parcel in events moving forward. These immediate regional conflicts would engulf, I think, every significant Pacific Island nation or Pacific nation within the region. Certainly would engulf U.S. forces that are stationed in that region, or provide cause for those forces to have to leave that region. And in so doing, I think that we would see a very real and very significant concurrent financial event happen in North American markets. And it's very interesting that we talk about a concurrent financial event. I got an interesting email just a few days ago, 6 days ago now, from an individual that just signed the email as a friend and patriot. And the email reads, and again, this is just, this is an interesting speculative on how things may go. It's primarily, I think, a patriot's opinion. But the email reads, "Dear SG, I follow you periodically and am what you would consider an insider. Before you even try, please know that I use a triple hop VPN and am very good at remaining in the sea of faces of we the people where I prefer to be. I am emailing you because it is my belief 2024 will be the year various online truther communities," and that's in quotes, "have been saying would come ever since 2019, 2020. Without divulging, I am a student of every major financial crash in modern history and have years of experience facilitating ultra-high net worth international monetary transactions. You and others are right, to a degree, about what is coming to the world, specifically a reconstituted financial world with different rules and next-generation enhancements that will one day make all of the talk about debt jubilees and QFS seem childish. But many commentators are also wrong when they speak of the how, the who, and the mechanisms driving this colossal shift. A major error in all of the reporting over the last 40 months is that this process can be accomplished with no additional pain for the peoples in the Western world, since the new systems are running in parallel. Now, while there are certainly new systems rolling out in every major node worldwide, and while many of them do run in parallel to current world markets, the final disconnection from the system for the Western world will have to include a short-term period of ultra-high inflation, followed by a flashpoint of a crisis kicking off. I would watch Japan, China, Israel, and North Korea for indicators as to when this may begin to happen. The crisis will last at least 10 to 14 days in my estimation, as Western world central banking and bloodline dynasty holdings are seized, cataloged, and repurposed for either discard or submission into the new system. News reports during this time period, assuming communication even remains possible, will be almost entirely incorrect, and even good citizen journalists will have a hard time isolating the truth of the events as they are occurring in real time. In general, I believe an outline could look like this. Going into a weekend by New York time, significant cyber collapses are likely to trigger a cascading crash of all electronic banking systems left inside SWIFT nations, which by this point primarily encompasses North America, Western and Central Europe, former Commonwealth countries, and a few Pacific nations. The crash will not be recoverable, and on Sunday, the Eurozone banks will acknowledge a liquidity crisis, as Europeans in multiple countries will try to get money from their accounts without success. Talk of bank runs and bank crises on social media will ignite a firestorm by the end of the weekend, and censorship will quickly begin taking them down. At the start of the following work week in North America, the liquidity crisis will become a contagion, leading major manufacturing organizations to indefinitely suspend their operations due to their interconnectedness with large-scale financial instruments and an inability to meet union and payroll demands. The financial sector is likely to begin a slow acknowledgement inside of a 24-hour period that the emperor has no clothes, and Goldman Sachs, Bank of America, JP Morgan, and others will be rumored to be going insolvent, if not there already. By Tuesday, ultra high net worth individuals will attempt to salvage assets from the system, and they will take to social media to garner public support for violence in doing so. It's my opinion that any of that class of people involved in crimes against humanity or forms of terrorism will be interdicted during this period by varying degrees of law enforcement and military supported operations. By the end of Tuesday, it is likely that the stock exchange will be collapsed by 35 to 40% from the start Monday morning, and trading will be manually halted to prevent further damage. By midweek, the contagion will be in full spread inside both the EU and North America. Any money people still have left in the banks will be stolen by the Biden regime and European leaders, bailed in through lawful mechanisms. While this will be the end of the jurisdiction of the corporation over money, they will take anything we voluntarily leave inside their system on their way out. Social protests will erupt in major US, Canadian, and European metros by the middle of the day, and stock exchanges are likely to drop another 25% before being manually halted. By Wednesday afternoon, Tether and various crypto stablecoins will crash, as their underpinnings will be exposed as illiquid, and all crypto will temporarily become worthless. Subprime housing and mortgages will begin to crash and will accelerate explosively by market close. The French and British governments will likely enter pre-collapse by this point, and public figures will begin to disappear from view as they seek to get ahead of population sentiment. On Thursday, Wall Street in New York is likely to begin a full public collapse, with hedge funds announcing illiquidity across the majority of their portfolios, and major banks will declare bankruptcy due to stock shorts, which will be revealed to be in the tens of trillions. This will lay bare the manipulation scheme of all worldwide markets by the Federal Reserve banking system and its major players. These banks will fail their required margin levels, and the FDIC will try to cover their losses. Since the FDIC has no money, though, they too will fold, and the Federal Reserve will be left to manage the contagion alone, red-handed. Subprime mortgage crashes will reach 60 to 70% by the end of Thursday, and the stock exchanges will collapse another 20% on the day before being manually halted. Commodities trading will also likely be halted before the end of the week, which will fuel the inferno. Headlines that evening from the treacherous media will probably blare something like Great Depression 2.0 and attempt to drive popular support for the Federal Reserve to fix the problem. Social protests will increase in their intensity, and by Thursday evening, support for a military coup against the U.S. government will begin to gain momentum across the country. By Friday, worldwide headlines will scream U.S. dollar insolvency, causing hundreds of billions of dollars in U.S. treasuries to be dumped in a matter of hours, and the commodities markets will soar. U.S. interest rates will rise meteorically in parallel and pop the bubble of the fiat system. Pressure on the U.S. government to resign will mount. Heads of state around the world will summon U.S. ambassadors to explain the events currently in motion. The German and Italian governments will likely collapse by the end of the week, and massive protests against the government, Wall Street, globalist bankers, and community-level sellouts in the United States will sweep the nation by Friday's end. Local authorities are probably going to be unable to quell the unrest. Traitors in local law enforcement will be highlighted during these protests and met with public fury. The stock exchange will collapse down on this day before it is halted and suspended indefinitely for a total of 92% or more since the start of the week. Local grocery and critical supply outlets and retail stores will be empty or closed by Friday, as supply chains will no longer be functioning nationwide. By the evening time, the dollar will be declared non grata in European nations seeking to stay above water. On Saturday, protests in the United States will increase in scale again, and pockets of violence are likely to develop. Election fraud data will be dumped onto the internet around this time, showing stolen elections since George H.W. Bush, and this will add a new dimension to public wrath. The current false government of the United States will seek to stifle the impact of this information by playing the only card left in the deck, the facilitation of multiple simultaneous terrorist attacks on U.S. soil, and a concurrent declaration of a wartime state of emergency leading to an overnight implementation, of trade, travel, internet, and communication restrictions. Calls for accountability against government officials at all levels will rage through the weekend, and by Sunday evening, organized terrorist groups will begin attacking government offices and buildings, law enforcement, and perhaps even public gatherings. These attacks will overwhelm localized law enforcement's ability to respond to the growing unrest, probably in mostly blue states. And by Sunday night, U.S. Military Northern Command will be forced to step in, engaging the terrorists along with their backers, financiers, and accomplices. This to preserve and defend the Republic and the Constitution. It's worth noting, SG, that the above is speculative in nature, and you should know this before you air this. But were something like this to occur in the next 7 to 10 days, or excuse me, in the 7 to 10 days leading up to 11/5/2024, it would not surprise me in the least. I am highly technically competent and knowledgeable of these arenas of power. These people play for keeps, but they never show their hand until they have absolutely nothing left to lose. And that clock will end at midnight on November 4th. Powerful. So again, Patriots, that's a speculative, hypothetical as far as I'm concerned. I can't corroborate that that's how it's going to look or how it's going to be. I can't corroborate that we're not going to see some sort of seamless transition and very little interruption whatsoever. What I can say and what I would acknowledge out there for, those that are listening to this broadcast is that we are entering a period of fundamental transformation of how we exchange value. And in order to implement that level of a change, I can see a significant destructuring that would need to occur. I think that we've got evidence of that destructuring happening in all significant areas of society. One of those areas being the examination of the financiers behind human smuggling and the markets that profit off of that fiat dollar system, that black market serpent system that we were just reading about a moment ago. And it's interesting that we saw, let me see here, where's it at? It's just a few days ago in the Montgomery County, Liberty Township of Ohio, Fuyao Glass America of Ohio, raided by the Department for Homeland Security. Let me see here. Looks like Department of Homeland had suspicions of money laundering, labor exploitation, and human smuggling. So Fuyao, F-U-Y-A-O, Fuyao Glass, and their parent company being Fuyao Glass Industry Group, or Fuyao Group. If you go and look up the largest institutional holders for Fuyao Group, you find JP Morgan Asset Management, BlackRock Fund Advisors, JP Morgan Investment Management, BlackRock Advisors UK, JP Morgan Asset Management UK, BlackRock Asset Management North Asia, China Southern Asset Management Company, and Banque de Luxembourg Investments, excuse me. So wasn't it JP Morgan that just a few months back paid almost $300 million so that they didn't have to admit publicly before the world that they assisted the financial activities of one of the world's most prolific human traffickers? I think that if I'm not mistaken, that was out of the Virgin Islands, and that was JP Morgan. And so we have JP Morgan, we have BlackRock, we have Bank of China involved in Fuyao. If you come over here to yahoo.com, major holders from Yahoo Finance, Vanguard International Stock Index, Vanguard Stock Index Emerging Stock Markets, Goldman Sachs, Harding, and this information, let me see here. This information appears to be current at close as of Hong Kong time. So when we look at things like the behavior of Homeland Security, this is the same organization that has been heavily involved in pedophilia, targeting, and human smuggling operations. They've been busting kidnapping cells. There's literally hundreds of press releases on their website. It's dhs.gov. You can go back a number of years and see all of the different reports from various investigations. The agent on the site here in, let me see here in Ohio, stated that, let me see here, that this is an ongoing investigation. So this is, part of a broader mission. It's clearly part of a broader effort to target these specific activities, right? And we know that these specific activities came underneath the purview of EO 13818 and a number of other purviews, right? So this particular period of time that we're living in, we're witnessing the dismantling of the system, from the financial to the infrastructural to the kinetic junction points on the ground, the organizations that may be heavily involved in these types of things, right? This is not an accusation against Fuyao Glass. It is very interesting that Fuyao Group's largest institutional investors and holders are entities that themselves have been now proven out in at least one capacity, proven out to be heavily involved in a direct capacity with the covering up of human smuggling. And DHS is now investigating Fuyao for exactly that. And we know that those investigations span not only the United States jurisdiction, but even worldwide. And speaking of worldwide, we also know that there's a militarized component to this, right? We know that the National Guard has been active around the world. We know that there's been very unusual behavior from intercompartmentalized units within the Guard, right? We saw the Pennsylvania National Guard deployed to Guantanamo Bay for prisoner protection immediately before the attempted assassination on President Trump. And I find that absolutely fascinating. Why would you request the Guard from the exact state? And in fact, I think that Guard unit that deployed may have been from the Pittsburgh area, and Butler is sort of an ancillary township to Pittsburgh. It's there right on the fringes, just a bit north of there. So you're talking about fundamentally a unit very, very close to how this, or to geographically, excuse me, close to where this event occurred. And they're deployed, of course, to Guantanamo Bay for prisoner protection and force reinforcement. So we've got a number of unusual behaviors from the U.S. military that we can highlight at any given point in time. And I know it's been a while since we've highlighted these in some specificity here on the audio files, but one of the ones I'd really like to highlight for everyone out there is this one. So on the 23rd of July, 3 earthquakes rattled Texas. These 3 earthquakes all happened in the same area, about 11 miles northeast of Hermleigh, which is a town of 500 people in Scurry County. Excuse me. The earthquakes were registered near the town of Hermleigh, about 56 miles northwest of Abilene. The first earthquake registered as a 4.9, the second a 4.4, and the last a 3.1. They all occurred in the same area around 250 miles west of Dallas and occurred about 5 miles below the surface. So we know from Air Force documents that one of the favored depths within the subterranean landscape for the placement of tunnel systems and large military grade laboratory systems and really what amounts to a build out of infrastructure beneath the surface, one of the favorite depths is 5 to 10 miles, anywhere within that range. While the exact cause of the earthquakes is not yet known, West Texas has seen an increased number of earthquakes in recent years due to fracking. So this is them acknowledging that they actually have no idea what's causing them, but they're attempting to assign a reason for it. So I got very curious and I thought, well, how far is this particular arena of activity from a significant military component? And here's what I've come to. We come over here. So Hermleigh, Texas is about 56 miles northwest of Abilene, Texas. In Abilene, Texas, we have Dyess Air Force Base. Dyess Air Force Base is a professional team delivering bombing, airlift support, training, and combat support to combatant command. Dyess Air Force Base trains all Air Force B-1 Lancer bomber crews and is commonly referred to as America's lift and strike base. Major commands include the Air Force Global Strike Command and the Air Mobility Command. So this is a very important component of the United States Air Force. Dyess Air Force Base is located in Abilene. Abilene is a military-friendly city in west central Texas, about 180 miles west of Dallas. It is a center of a 19-county area called the Big Country and the economic hub of this part of Texas. Abilene is also accessible by 5 major interstate highways. Let me see here. So isn't it interesting that the Abilene Airport recently hosted individuals from the 111th Engineer Battalion. Let me see here. Oh, it's going to lock me out behind an account wall. The 111th Engineer Battalion, let me see here, was inducted into federal service for the Second World War as part of the 36th Infantry Division at Fort Worth, Texas, and moved to Camp Bowie, where a 1st Battalion was redesignated the 111th Engineers. Let me see here. It goes through and it tells us the history through the war. The unit was awarded campaign credit. Excuse me. The unit returned to the United States in December of 1945. You see here, when the 36th Infantry Division was reconstituted, the 111th Engineer Combat Battalion was reactivated. 111th Battalion was reconstituted in 1973 as an element of the 4th Armored, but the battalion is today an element of the 36th Infantry. The 36th Infantry. So, okay, so I know I'm going fast here, Non, so let's back up so that we can paint the picture. On the 23rd of July, we have reports of unusual earthquakes 56 miles northwest of Abilene, Texas, which is also northwest of Dyess Air Force Base. Dyess Air Force Base hosts the Air National Guard Wing and one of the Air National Guard wings in Texas, as well as the Air Mobility Command and the Air Force Global Strike Command. Dyess Air Force Base also hosts pilot crews for the B-1 Lancers, doing essentially all of the training for the Lancers. They're known as the Air Force's Lift and Strike Base. So this is a quick response, forward activation style force that's going to be on site here. We have Abilene Airport hosting the, let me see here, where's it at? Excuse me, we have the 111th Engineer Battalion coming into, or from Abilene, Texas, I believe. All right. The Abilene Regional Airport tenants include Aero EA 471, Texas State College, the Texas Air National Guard. Look at that. So the 111th Engineer Battalion is stationed also in Abilene, it would appear, or currently on site in Abilene. They are part of the 36th Infantry. The 36th Infantry Division was activated to assist the Texas National Guard with the COVID-19 pandemic. The unit assisted with delivering pallets of protective equipment, decontamination, distributing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. More service members within the 36th Infantry Division assisted in preparation for civil disturbances triggered by the George Floyd protests. Remember what the George Floyd protests represented? Those were Antifa, right? So the 36th Infantry responded in helping civil authorities prepare for these. The service members were trained in crowd control tactics, including non-lethal responses and assisting civilian law enforcement agencies. So isn't it very, very interesting then that we've got these activities happening in Texas, just northwest of a military town that plays host to a number of forward, essentially quick responsive style teams. And what is so fascinating about this to me is when you go online and you start looking for causality, they throw out everything from fracking to instability in the in the geological shelf, to even climate change was in one of the articles that I looked up. But fundamentally, no one is talking about the fact that there were only 3 very quick quakes that weren't very strong in nature, and you didn't really have the same aftershock pattern. And I'm not a geologist, but you didn't really have, from what I could tell, the same aftershock regression, if you will, the decrescendo that you would normally see. The magnitudes were very close together, all of the way even to the last one at a 3.1, and it starts at a 4.9. And these earthquakes happened essentially right at 4.8 miles down. This tells me, Anons, that we've got something more at play here, and we've got proximity and cause and the history with the activation of the 36th Infantry, which is a component, I believe, of the U.S. Army. Give me a moment here. The 36th Infantry is an infantry division of the U.S. Army and part of the Texas Army National Guard. And so the 111th Engineers from the 36th Infantry is right there in Abilene. Abilene Airport serves the Texas National Guard and Air National Guard. Dyess Air Force Base is right there. They're a quick response unit. It just looks very optimistic to me in an encouraging way. Again, I can't claim that some of these things are true as we point out these proximities, and I don't want to be irresponsible in doing so. But what I can say is that the official story and the official narrative is almost always not true. Speaking of the official narrative, when we talk about the change of batter and all of the media attention surrounding Kamala Harris and Michelle Obama, Big Mike, and various potential candidates like Josh Shapiro coming out of Virginia, or excuse me, coming out of Pennsylvania, or Gavin Newsom coming out of Virginia. I think fundamentally those official stories are also, misdirection and disinformation to hide the activities that's currently happening between the Obama group and the Clintons. The Clintons have been heavily involved in criminality and selling out of the U.S. government for a long time. While I personally believe and have espoused on this program that Hillary 1.0 is long gone, and indeed we may even be seeing Bill 2.0 as well, although I'm not as certain about that one. What I can say is that the Clinton legacy will be wrecked by the 2.0, the 3.0, however many versions or doubles are necessary to drive the point home, because this family is a family that has caused irreparable harm to the peoples of the United States, the peoples of the world. And if anyone out there is familiar with something called frazzle drip, there's a deep personal, I think, sinfulness about the Clinton family that really takes it to a whole next level. I've talked for a while on this particular program that the Clintons will be, dragged out and pitted against Donald Trump once again, just like a 2016, excuse me, rematch. I apologize. And I know that that seems a fantastical notion to a lot of people out there, especially when I'm simultaneously in the same breath saying that the real Hillary is no longer around. But just a few days ago, looks like the 20th of July, from Jason Miller in DC. Jason Miller, a senior advisor to former President Donald Trump's campaign. This tweet exclaims that she's running, and then includes an article from The Hill, ready for round two, why we need Hillary more than ever. Jason Miller says these opinion pieces don't happen organically. Crooked is on the move with 3 exclamation points. Q uses the phrase on the move quite a bit. Ready for round two, why we need Hillary more than ever. Now, this coming from an advisor to former President Donald Trump's campaign, this coming again just 10 days ago. And I'm very much expecting that despite all of the media fanfare and all of the various overtures that are being paid to the Democrats and Kamala, and the outright corruption of all of the Democratic candidates, and Kamala and the 25th Amendment, and where, what really happened with Joe Biden. We've got all of these different circulating narratives and circulating pools, and those are helping to obfuscate what I believe to be the true intention here and what's actually going to be occurring. And what's going to be occurring, I think, is going to historically ignite what you would consider the populist Democrat base, the base that is a never Trump sort of ideology, but at the same time they do want betterment for the world. They're not, extinctionists or nihilistic paganists. I think when we talk about, appealing to that particular base and getting that base into the public narrative and awakening fold, one of the ways to do that would be to present them with the most undesirable, most universally disliked political figure in recent modern American history, and that would be Hillary Clinton. I think President Trump has in fact told us some of this himself. It's not been that long ago that President Trump highlighted on Truth Social, this just a few days ago. He retruthed a post by a user called AKA Pro Boss, and the post is a giant meme with Christopher Wray's face. And the meme states, "What did you know and when did you know about it? Retruth if you want to know who ordered the assassination of Donald J. Trump." Now, I find it fascinating that Wray's face is placarded in the middle of this meme in a very obvious fashion. And the text on the meme is clearly directed at Director Wray in a personal fashion, and Donald Trump retruthed this onto his Truth Social page. Now, this is very interesting to me because there's a Q post that addresses this specifically. Let me see if I can find it really quick here. It's on one of these tabs that I've got open. I've got too many of them open. All right. Q drop 586 from January the 22nd, 2018, 9:47:32 p.m. Eastern Time. What would happen if texts originating from an FBI agent to several internals discussed the assassination possibility of POTUS or a member of his family? What if the texts suggest foreign allies were involved? Forget the Russia setup, 1 of 22. This is only the beginning. Be careful what you wish for. As the world turns. Could messages such as those be publicly disclosed? What happens to the FBI? What happens to the DOJ? What happens to special counsel? What happens in general? Every FBI, DOJ previous case could be challenged. Lawless. Think logically. We haven't even started the drops, re human trafficking and sacrifices. Worst. Those good who know cannot sleep. Those good who know cannot find peace. Those good who know will not rest until those responsible are held accountable. Nobody can possibly imagine the pure evil and corruption out there. Those you trust are the most guilty of sin. Who are we taught to trust? Remember where Q says trust Ray? If you are religious, pray. 60% will remain private for humanity. These people should be hanging. Now, when we come back to the FBI component in this, let me see if I can get back to where I was at a moment ago. I find it fascinating that Q tells us to trust Ray, and Q also tells us that disinformation is necessary and that double meanings exist. These are direct quotes from the entity, that references itself as Q. And so I'm walking with the literal interpretation, sort of the plain text interpretation of that. And I got to thinking about the potential FBI text message debacle and how we already saw a Peter Strutz, Lisa Page style situation with Crossfire Hurricane and the text messages that were exchanged between the two of them privately that were later leaked out to the public. And if I'm not mistaken, it's actually been just earlier this month that settlements were agreed, and those traitorous individuals were actually paid for their inconvenience, I suppose, over the last few years. But regardless, double meanings exist. Trust Ray. I've heard things sort of tying back to symbolic cosmic interpretation that describe how things need to sometimes work in twos or threes in order to really be effective at that spiritual consciousness level. And remember, Anons, we're in a consciousness war. So I looked up the FBI's field office in Pittsburgh. The Pittsburgh field office covers the Butler County area, and the special agent in charge is a gentleman by the name of Kevin Rojek. Now, Kevin Rojek is just a really fascinating man. If we come over here to his official LinkedIn page, he was nice enough to allow us access to see it. This LinkedIn page begins with an education background starting at American University, a Bachelor of Arts, Political Science and Government. This was from 1987 to 1991. After 1991 and for up until 2002, so for 11 years, he served as a United States Army officer. He served in a number of roles in artillery and intelligence, culminating in being selected a member of the Army's premier Special Operations Force, the 75th Rangers, selected for position after rigorous training and interviewing. After that, we have a gap from 2002 to 2012. There's a 10-year gap here. Now, that's just fascinating to me. But in 2012, under Hussein Obama, we see a relocation to the Washington, D.C. area and the acceptance of a supervisory special agent role for the cyber division of the FBI. Counterintelligence division, supervisory special agent embedded in FBI cyber division for an 18-month period. Served as Cyber Division Program Manager for 8 field offices, providing headquarters level oversight and leadership. Provided funding approval, additional resources, and coordination with other agencies. Remember, the skill sets and the backgrounds are what matter here, Patriots. Q tells us there are Patriots in trusted positions, but problems still remain. So I'm rolling with that interpretation. As Cyber Division Threat Manager, provided similar services and program management oversight globally. Oh, I apologize. I found our missing gap here. So from 2003 up until looks like 2012, this individual left the United States Army to become a special agent at FBI Norfolk in Norfolk, Virginia. Promoted to jobs of increasing responsibility, supervising the office's cyber squad, responsible for criminal and national security intrusion investigations, as well as violent crimes against children. In 2014, Cyber Squad Supervisor for the FBI office in Cincinnati. Held that position for 5 years, responsible for all cyber investigations. What just happened in Ohio, right? Let me see here. Let me see here. He in 2019 to 2021, he was promoted to assistant special agent in charge for FBI Cincinnati. Looks like after that, in May of 2021, he moved back to Washington, D.C., Baltimore as special agent and section chief for the FBI Cyber Division. Now this is after the installation of Biden, 3 months after the installation of Biden. FBI's senior detailee to the National Security Agency and U.S. Cyber Command. The FBI's liaison focused on collaborating on cyber issues of national importance, develop initiatives, recommendations on policy development, and strategic planning. In February of 2023, promoted to Special Agent Chief of Staff for the FBI's Executive Assistant Director for the Criminal Cyber Response Branch, responsible for managing a staff of 5. And get this, in January of this year, less than 8 months ago, promoted to Special Agent in Charge, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Now, if I come over here, excuse me, FBI.gov, and I read their press release from January the 29th of 2024, and I'm emphasizing 29 because I'm going to come back to that in a second, Patriots. Kevin Rojek named special agent in charge of the FBI's Pittsburgh field office. Director Wray has named Kevin Rojek as special agent in charge of the Pittsburgh field office. Director Wray. Mr. Rojek most recently served as the chief of staff for the Criminal Cyber and Response Branch. Mr. Rojek joined the FBI in 2002, where he was assigned to Norfolk, investigating counterintelligence matters. In 2010, he was promoted to supervisory special agent of the Norfolk Field Office Cyber and Global Counterintelligence Squad. In 2012, he was promoted to FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C., where he served in the Cyber Division Asia Cyber Operations Unit. 2013, he returned to the Norfolk field office and was assigned to the counterintelligence squad. The next year, he was promoted to cyber supervisor in the Cincinnati office. In this role, he was responsible for overseeing criminal and national security computer intrusion investigations for the field office. He was also responsible for Cincinnati's computer forensics program. In 2019, he was promoted to special agent in charge of the Cincinnati field office, and in this role was responsible for leading the programs as well as the evidence response teams. In 2021, he was promoted, this is right after Biden, he was promoted to serve as Section Chief Detailee, National Security Agency, U.S. Cyber Command in the FBI Cyber Division. In that role, he was the primary interlocutor between the FBI, the NSA, and Cyber Command, assisting in the execution of joint operations targeting our country's most sophisticated cyber adversaries. In 2023, he was promoted to Chief of Staff for the Criminal Cyber and Response Branch. Prior to joining the FBI, he served 11 years as a commissioned officer in the U.S. Army, obtaining the rank of Major. He served 1 tour in Afghanistan during Operation Enduring Freedom. He earned a bachelor's degree in political science from American University. So what if FBI texts discussing the assassination possibility of POTUS were to surface? This is just speculative in nature. But if that were to happen, would this individual be qualified to handle the investigation at a very high level? I think the question is a bit rhetorical after covering the background. The answer is clearly yes. And so I find it very interesting, the audio that dropped, where this individual, Mr. Rojek, announced that he had plans to interview President Donald Trump about this assassination attempt. Now, this was published on July the 29th. So before I play this for each of you, let's talk a bit for a second about 29. On July 27th, the day of Trump's Minnesota rally, at 10:12 a.m. Eastern Time, Trump posted a 2-minute and 9-second video, and the video at the thumbnail, there we go, the thumbnail image of the video is crazy Nancy Pelosi at the very top of what appears to be some sort of circular compass or a bullseye of some kind. And that bullseye is offset by a number of Knights Templar crosses, what we would call, Jesuit crosses. The video itself, if you hit play, the very first thing that you see is an EBS style interruption, a short, one of those multicolored video panes. And again, people can find this on the Truth Social of Real Donald Trump, July 27, 2024, 10:12 a.m. Eastern Time. 2 days later, on the 29th of July, the same day that the article that we're about to listen to came out and was published, Trump posted a 29-second video primarily about a Kamala Harris issue, a Kamala Harris presidential victory as it pertains to the border issue. That's what I'm trying to say. Trump states that this would be the end of America. The individual speaking in the 29-second clip is Senator Elizabeth Warren, a member of the Finance Committee within the Senate, and that's worth remembering. So 29 is a significant number, and they love their numbers, and we love using their numbers and sticking their numbers in their faces. And Q references the activities that were recorded by various patriotic military actors off of cell phones, excuse me, that were taken into room 29 on Epstein Island. The crash of 1929 also occurred in with the 29 there. And so I find it fascinating that Q Drop 29 discusses North Korea again. Q Drop 29, November the 1st of 2017 at 2:13 and 10 seconds a.m. So there's our 10:12, right? 10:12 a.m. President Trump 29-second video, or excuse me, 2-minute and 9-second video of Kamala, Nancy Pelosi. This drop reads, "Some things must remain classified to the very end. North Korea is not being run by Kim. He's an actor in the play. Who is the director? The truth would sound so outrageous, most Americans would riot, revolt, and reject it. The pedo networks are being dismantled. The child abductions for satanic rituals, i.e. Haiti and other third world countries, are paused, but not terminated until players are in full custody. We pray every single day for God's guidance and direction as we are up against pure evil." When we talk about the 29 significance and this video here that I'm about to play for each of you, we are up against pure evil, but we are utilizing the full force and might of the U.S. executive, the U.S. military, and coordinated worldwide militarized and domestic civilian law enforcement operations to target an evil that has infested the planet much like a cancer infests the body. Would it be something, just for speculation again, if we were to see texts emerging from FOIA requests or congressional investigations discussing FBI internals wanting Donald Trump removed? Would Kevin Rojek, special agent in charge of FBI Pittsburgh, be a patriot or a traitor in that landscape? Maybe history will tell us, maybe it won't. But either way, I want you all to hear his words.
It's so frustrating. It's hard to sleep at night sometimes. You know, you just lie awake.
Apologies. We've had an interruption, I suppose, on the website. And so now I'm going to have to re-ascertain the video feed. Let's see if that'll do it.
We have contacted former President Trump, and he has agreed to participate in a victim interview. As part of our investigation, we examined over 2,100 tips from the public through our digital media tip line, including images, videos, documents, and audio recordings.
If you want to really see something that said, take a look at what happened.
L. They lose. So that sounds like an individual who is by the book and who is willing to have the tough conversations that need to happen. This could be an individual that serves to preserve the honor and the integrity of those FBI officials in various field offices and indeed within the entirety of the agency who took the oath genuinely and transparently and meant it. This is an incredible period of time. We are in a remarkable balance, if you will, of good versus evil, and we are retaking the game board with every passing week. One of the areas that I want to talk a little bit about with the retaking of the game board is the recent events in Venezuela. We talked about 5 or 6 files ago, I believe it was, that Venezuela would become important in the sense that it would be heavily involved in some regards with the narrative pertaining to the security of the United States and its own internal security. I'm no fan of Nicolas Maduro or the Chavez party. Quite frankly, I've seen behavior on display from a number of different arenas in South America, in all of the countries, that give me pause on lending my support one way or another to any particular group. That being said, something that was very compelling to me and that I think is worth showcasing to each of you is the fact that a certain individual involved in the Venezuelan situation has something very familiar. What is that? That would be a large red folder activating some sort of emergency condition within their own country's laws to coordinate into a much broader counterinsurgency and de-entrenchment operation. And so I submit to each of you out there, what is one of the main playgrounds of the Western world intelligence and espionage community? And when we talk about Western world, we're also talking about the CCP, the Israeli Mossad, and the Swiss communities. We're talking about a concentrated occultic superstructure that governs those same intelligence communities. What are the playgrounds? The playgrounds are the sub-Saharan continent of Africa, the western portion of the African continent, the far eastern portion directly south of the Egyptian, countryside in the African continent, and the countries in Latin and South America, Southeast and South Asia, and Central Asia along the steppes. These are significant playgrounds where we have unentrenchment operations that have to occur. This is why we've seen the ratcheting up of military pressures in nearly all of those geographic locations that I just referenced. I believe war to be coming to Venezuela and South America in some form or fashion. I'm not certain what will happen with the Maduro government, except to say that there is a capitulation or some sort of submission process in play that will yield a control lever back to we the people in an appropriate fashion. While we're on the subject, we should also talk about the fact that Maduro's opponent, in this particular election was an individual named Edmundo Gonzalez Urrutia. Edmundo Gonzalez was born on the 29th of August in La Victoria, Venezuela, and is a member of the party that formerly was the Democratic Unity Roundtable. The Democratic Unity Roundtable became the Unitary Party or the Democrat Unitary Platform in 2021. The Democratic Unitary Platform is a US-backed Venezuelan opposition political alliance made up of civil society, so think high society acolytes and elites, trade unions, and retired military personnel, so NATO-style warlords perhaps, as well as deputies of the 2016 to 2021 National Assembly. Gonzalez Urrutia was the presidential candidate of this very party, and now we have rhetoric in recent days from the White House pulpit here in the United States discussing the fairness, quote unquote, and the transparency, quote unquote, of the Venezuelan election process. This is not to say that election fraud was not deployed. I'm certain that it was. This is to say that the purpose of this destabilization is not primarily about the election fraud. It is the fact that the election fraud is in Venezuela will unentrench foreign intelligence assets that have taken up stock and have been controlling the levers of power and probably Maduro's strings in the background for a very long time. The same is true of what happened in China. The same is true in large part of what was occurring with the Russian oligarchs that Putin has been steadily cleaning out of the Russian influential landscape for a number of years. The FSB has been hard at work identifying traitors that are exactly of this nature. But what if your country doesn't have the capability to do that internally? What if enough patriotic actors simply don't exist? What if too much foreign capability is present upon and within your soil and would destabilize and plunge your nation into civil war? These are considerations that we must have, and we must acknowledge that while it was Venezuela that hosted several servers, as well as Iran and Serbia, that hosted several servers that accessed the U.S. cyber landscape and the U.S. election system in 2020 and again in 2022. We know that in the 2020 election, while the access was foreign, they used CIA technology. We have to ask how the credentials play, what platforms and operating devices would actually run such software, what type of specialized, highly individualized, patented equipment would be needed. These are very interesting questions, and I believe we will see war come to Venezuela and some of the other South American countries as a way of removing the entrenchment, tragic though it may be. We've seen the same happening in the Ukraine, in Eastern Europe, soon to come to the Pacific theater, certainly happening within the Middle East. And again, in, I think, a large preparation with that theater preparing to expand even more. We're building up to an incredible time here in the United States of America, unprecedented in the annals of American history. It only fits then that in that incredible time, our great military forces would be paying attention. We have Cyber Command working actively with domestic law enforcement. We have various U.S. government agencies working in league with international law enforcement agencies, and in some regards, special operations groups that are providing militarized reinforcement on the ground. We've covered all of this on previous files. So isn't it fascinating that in one of the document dumps that has come through from an individual purporting to be a counter-terrorist operator in a mercenary capacity on behalf of the armed services of the United States, we see exactly that theme at play. Give me a moment here. Let me segue into this particular component of our discussion. We'll cover these documents and then we will disconnect for the evening. I've now been up quite a bit longer than I expected to be, but talking with each of you, especially late in the evening, is just genuinely exciting. All right. Moving this here. Before you, let me move my visibility bar so that I can read here. I apologize. All right. Before you, you have something titled Organized Crime Report, February of 2024. The following documents constitute an expansive report on organized crime currently taking place in blank, Colorado, showing record from 2020 to the present. The crimes include, but are not limited to, extensive fraud, financial crimes, potential racketeering and tax fraud, civil rights violations, violations of constitutional law on both federal and state levels. The serious human rights violations include assault, battery, kidnapping, human trafficking, identity theft, and ongoing domestic terrorism. We would like to emphasize the national security threat presented with the many violations of Executive Order 13818 as detailed in our reporting. The President has declared an ongoing national emergency with respect to serious human rights abuse and corruption. This executive order is said to deal with the unusual and extraordinary threat to national security, foreign policy, and the economy of the United States of America that such abuses pose. These crimes should be investigated and prosecuted under said national emergency. All officials, agents, or individuals named in the following documents have been put on notice multiple times. Having been served certified copies of the crime reports against them, attached criminal affidavits, each and every individual was given ample time to defend themselves against the sworn testimony and failed to respond, therefore placing these documents in default. These officials are routinely administering the trusts of Americans without consent. It is well understood that the same officials are registered with and working under a foreign agency, Under FARA, such individuals are required by law to provide a registration statement, and each has failed to do so. Again, please note our national emergency under EO 13818 as well as 13581 concerning these foreign principals and transnational criminal organizations. All perpetrators were notified multiple times to cease and desist all fraudulent activity. We consider the agents to be dangerous and have ongoing concerns. Please note the most recent, and then a heavy redaction here, foreign registration number included here. So we're talking about someone here with an identifying number or a group of some kind, perhaps, working closely with, and then we've got this removed as well. Any public servant who breaks the law and violates their oath is by law stripped of their office and all immunity they once enjoyed. Any public official or agency that proceeds without jurisdiction is guilty of treason. A number of these individuals have been on notice and proceeding for 3 years. There is a general rule that a ministerial officer who acts wrongfully, although in good faith, is nevertheless liable in a civil action and cannot claim the immunity of the sovereign. Any judge who does not comply with his oath to the Constitution and engages in acts in violation of the supreme law of the land, the judge is engaged in acts of treason. Upon request for lawful tax information, the clerk refused to provide a completed W-9 form. Their unlawful administration include the evasion of taxes as well. We have also reported these crimes to the Attorney General, Attorney Regulation Council, the blank Sheriff CID, and blank all have failed to investigate. These failures will be considered in the larger and more expansive audit of our regulatory agencies who collude in routine violations of constitutional law. Given the undeniable corruption throughout the judiciary, we have also submitted in this report to the blank other government and military bodies. As blank covert counter-terrorist operator, I find good reason for the declared national emergency of EOs 13818 and 13581. This weaponization of government and subsequent widespread and routine victimization of innocent Americans by foreign principals and agents for concealed profit constitutes a national security threat worthy of a military-grade investigation. Space Force to aid in just such an investigation and to also bring these crimes into a military tribunal for the Constitutional Republic of the United States of America. Then we have a redaction. So that document was from February, ostensibly, of 2024. Now, I want you to remember that as I bring this other one up and get it prepared here. I want to make sure the zoom is enough that you all can see it. Because that report was, again, allegedly submitted in February of 2024, and essentially it very much seemed like I've done all that I can as an operator. I'm now imploring that we investigate this in a larger fashion. So coming over here, affidavit of fact, crime report, and ongoing military tribunal notice. This is a heavily redacted document. My mercenary firm, conditions of our contract upon request. The rest of this is blanked out. I am serving strictly in a military capacity as a trainer and an auditor. Meanwhile, the assembled terrorist cell of Operation Blank, complicit in a considerable conspiracy to deprive rights over the past blank based on extensive fraud and perjury. See the members of the domestic terror cell below. These are the subjects of the military tribunal audit and investigation underway by blank. Subjects of the investigation are under 24/7 bio, psychological, and signals intelligence surveillance by the combined military intelligence apparatus of the nation. Reporting to Space Force and blank at the behest of the Department of blank. I have read and informed all members of the belligerent domestic terror cell I have read in and informed, all members of the belligerent domestic terror cell almost every step of the way as a Tier 0 counter-terrorist psychological intelligence operator for the military services of the nation. Take heed, please. Thank you for your cooperation. We are here to assist. For the record, I am not a member of any movement, strictly in a military capacity under contract to the Armed Forces of the United States of America. 3/2024. This was left on purpose. Look at this. This was the very next month, supposedly. Conspirators of the ad hoc terrorist cell on military trial. Colorado Inc., acting governor, terrorist negotiator, agent of state. County Inc., acting district attorney, judge, terrorist negotiator, defense. I'm assuming maybe defense counsel, maybe public defenders would be right here. City of Inc., acting mayor, internal affairs chief, police chief, judge. Looks like prosecutors, acting police agent, more potential public defenders, or perhaps city defenders. And then we have something Inc., the name's removed, president, legal counsel, and then 3 managers. It looks like we also have attention being given to sheriff, criminal investigative division, and FBI DHS. This affidavit prepared for County, Colorado, USA Incorporated, prepared by someone who's a special operator, private contractor reporting to blank. Mission facts. Clearance and operation are both completely removed. Mission type, live action military operation. Fractal, universal impact, local action. Initiator, U.S. Army, removed. Space Force, removed. Support, these look like various agencies. DHS, DOD, DOJ, FBI. This document is true and complete to the fullest extent of my knowledge and authority over my quantum autograph and trademark sigil with right for fingerprint. Special Operator 2024. Assuming for a moment that those documents are valid and have legitimacy, and I apologize, Anons, I just can't prove that they do. But provided that they do, then we are looking at a potential 3-month period, really, coming up on just over 3 months now, towards that November 5th season, where a lot will change. On the other side of that, I think those changes will become meteoric in fashion and in nature. We are looking at an amazing and incredible time. You know, the DOJ and the Pentagon gave us guidance for how the domestic deployment of the U.S. Army to fight terrorism would actually look. And wouldn't you know it, in Q Drop 2523 on December the 2nd of 2018, Q says, in reference to, let's see here, in reference to Senator Graham questioning Justice Kavanaugh, I guess this was during the confirmation hearings for Kavanaugh. They are unlawful enemy combatants, in quotes. Graham questioning Kavanaugh regarding enemy combatants. Is this unusual? Define treason. EO, effective January 1, 2019. DOJ Office of Legal Counsel, opinion regarding detainment of U.S. citizens as enemy combatants. Drops combined paint a full picture. Do you believe in coincidence? May God bless those who fight to defend this great nation. We, the people. If we come over to justicedepartment.gov, the Office of Legal Counsel, you see here, let me pull the memo up. The U.S. Department of Justice, Office of Legal Counsel, memorandum for Alberto Gonzalez, counsel to the president, from John C. Yu, Deputy Assistant Attorney General, and Robert Delahunty, Special Counsel, regarding authority for use of military force to combat terrorist activities within the United States. This memo published the 23rd of October, 2001. You have asked, and this is a 37-page memo, Anon, so I'm not going to read all of it, but I'm going to read a couple of important points. You can find it at justice.gov /OLC/OLC-FOIA-electronic-reading-room. You have asked for our office's views on the authority for the use of military force to prevent or deter terrorist activity inside the United States. Specifically, you have asked whether the Posse Comitatus Act limits the ability of the president to engage the military domestically and what constitutional standards apply to its use. We conclude that the president has ample constitutional and statutory authority to deploy the military against international or foreign terrorists operating within the United States. We further believe that the use of such military force generally is consistent with constitutional standards and that it need not follow the exact procedures that govern law enforcement. Now, if we come down to page 14 of this document, the text and history of the Constitution, supported by the interpretations of past administrations, the courts, and Congress, show that the president has the independent, non-statutory power to take military action, domestic as well as foreign, if he determines such actions to be necessary to respond to the terrorist attacks upon the United States from September 11, 2001 and before. So they're applying within this memo retroactive authority. Keep that in mind, patriots. The War Powers Resolution does not stand alone as an acknowledgement by Congress of the president's emergency powers. In the wake of the September 11th incident, Congress enacted Senate Joint Resolution 23, Public Law number 107-40. Congress found that on September 11th, 01, acts of treacherous violence were committed against the United States and its citizens, and that such acts render it both necessary and appropriate that the United States exercise its right to self-defense and to protect U.S. citizens both at home and abroad, and that such acts continue to pose an unusual and extraordinary threat to the national security and foreign policy of the United States. That last segment of that sentence is almost a word-for-word copy of a lot of the phrases that are utilized in Trump's executive orders. Section 2 of this law authorizes the president to use all necessary and appropriate force against those nations, organizations, or persons he deems determined, planned, authorized, committed, or aided the terrorist attacks that occurred on September 11th, 2001, or harbored such organizations or persons in order to prevent any future acts of international terrorism against the United States by such nations, organizations, or persons. Let me see if I'll move down here just a little bit. We next address the question whether the Posse Comitatus Act 18 U.S. Code 1385 would restrict the president's authority to deploy the armed forces domestically. We conclude that it does not apply and does not prohibit a presidential decision to deploy the armed forces domestically for a military purpose. We believe that domestic deployment of the armed forces to prevent and deter terrorism is fundamentally military and not law enforcement. Yet, even if the Posse Comitatus were thought to apply, the statute may still permit domestic deployment due to the exceptions for actions that are authorized by the Constitution. The Act states, whoever, except in cases and under circumstances expressly authorized by the Constitution or an act of Congress, willfully uses any part of the Army or the Air Force as a Posse Comitatus or otherwise to execute the laws, shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 2 years. The Act was originally a section, the PCA was originally a section inserted into an Army Appropriation Act as a backwash of the Reconstruction period following the Civil War. Its legislative history indicates that the immediate objective of the legislation was to put an end to the use of federal troops to police elections in ex-Confederate states. Before the PCA was enacted, the Attorney General Cushing had opined that under the Judiciary Act of 1789, a federal marshal, like a sheriff, had the authority to muster a posse comitatus to aid him in the executions of his duties. A posse comitatus, which included everyone in a district more than 15 years old, could include the military of all denominations, militia, soldiers, Marines, and all of whom are alike bound to obey the commands of the sheriff or the marshal. The fact that they are then organized as military bodies under the immediate command of their own officers does not affect their legal character. The Posse Comitatus rejected some of these opinions and practices and barred the use of the military domestically as a Posse Comitatus or otherwise to execute the laws. Both the express language of the act and its history show that it was intended to prevent the use of the military in law enforcement purposes, but it does not address or acknowledge domestic deployment of troops for military operations against potential attacks on the United States. Both the Justice Department and the Defense Department have accordingly interpreted that the PCA does not bar military deployments which pursue a military or foreign policy function. In application of the Posse Comitatus Act to assistance to the United States National Central Bureau, Opinion 195-1989, 13 Operating OLC, Our office cited and agreed with the Department of Defense regulation, which interpreted the posse comitatus not to bar military actions undertaken primarily for a military purpose. We said the regulations provide that actions taken for the primary purpose of furthering a military or foreign function of the United States are permitted, and we agree that posse comitatus does not prohibit military involvement in actions that are primarily of a military or foreign affairs nature, even if they have an incidental effect on local law enforcement, provided that such actions are not undertaken for the express purpose of executing those laws. Because using military force to combat terrorism would be for the purpose of protecting the nation rather than executing the laws, domestic deployment in the current situation would not violate the posse comitatus. Coming over here to page 32 of the document. So I read for about a page and a half there. In the aftermath of the Civil War, the Supreme Court upheld legislation enacted by Congress and enforced by the President that confiscated the property of rebels, designated as such. Miller v. United States, 78 U.S. 1870. The plaintiff had argued that the relevant provisions of the legislation were municipal regulations only, i.e., just statutes against crimes, and therefore that the Fifth and Sixth Amendments applied. The court rejected this contention, however, holding that the provisions were not enacted under the municipal power of Congress to legislate for the punishment of crimes, but were an exercise of the war powers of the government. Because the power to declare war involves the power to prosecute it by all means and in any manner in which war may legitimately be prosecuted, it therefore includes the right to seize and confiscate all property of an enemy and to dispose of it at the will of the captor. Further, the court upheld the confiscations despite the United States citizenship of the property owners. Now, why was Graham so worried about it in 2018? I just told you why. Those must be considered enemies who, though subjects or citizens of the lawful government, are residents of the territory under the power or control of the party resisting that government. Have they not voluntarily subjected themselves to that party? And is it not as important to take from them the sinews of war, their property, as it is to confiscate the property of rebel enemies resident within the rebel territory? Indeed, the court even suggested that the property of disloyal residents within the Union could have also been confiscated in the same manner. Referring to the experience of the framing generation during the Revolutionary War, the court found that the practice of the period showed the general understanding that aiders and abettors of the public enemy were themselves public enemies, and hence their property could be lawfully confiscated. Miller established that certain basic constitutional rights do not apply to enemy combatants, and that even United States citizenship may not negate the possibility that one may have the legal status of an enemy of war. Anons, patriots, we are in an incredible time where the pressure is truly on. We are in it for keeps. They are losing their money. They're losing their hideaways. They're losing their roadways. They're losing their drug running. They're losing their influence in pulpits of power. Influential individuals have disappeared or been replaced. Some individuals have switched sides in exchange for guaranteed protection. They're resorting to increasing and escalating desperation. And once we arrive to the penultimate point, that destabilization of civil society that Chris Miller referenced at the beginning of 2023 on a podcast, we are going to see events like we've never seen before. Is it possible that the 10 days of darkness are the 5th of November to the 15th of November, 2024? Remember. Is it possible that the military, in fact, revolts at the voting booth, just as we were told by President Trump on the 9th of June, 2024? We are alive for the most amazing time in American and world history. We are witnessing the systematic destruction of the old guard forever. We will build a new earth with the lessons that we take from this experience. I am enthused and mightily encouraged to walk the road with all of you. God bless you today. I hope as you listen to the file, whether you're drifting off to sleep in the early morning hours or whether you're at work, putting in the time, doing the grind, making and helping our nation to go forward. I hope that you will appreciate that you are alive for these events. You get to see the end of an age in real time. A fleeting moment in the annals of human history, which will define our entire future and the overarching worldwide cooperation of one humanity, distinct in culture, with the mission to glorify this earth and their God. Nothing is sweeter than that. I'll be back with each of you again soon, everyone. Keep your head up. It's going to get fun. God bless. This is SGNR. Bye-bye.